All right. Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1,000,000 Relationships Podcast. And this is going to be an awesome conversation today. Today, I'm here with Dan Kuschell. Dan, welcome. So awesome to have you today.
It's awesome to finally put this together, Kevin. Thank you.
It's not, yeah, right? I mean, everything happens in perfect time,
Yeah, 17 years. So we've known each other 17 years. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. We were talking about it. We're getting older because, I always start off by talking about how we met, and you and I met through Joe Polish, 17 years ago. You were doing some stuff. Actually, no, Joe had started Genius Network that year, right, in 2007, and you were in Genius Network. Yes. First, how many members were in Genius Network that very first year?
I believe it was 20. I believe, officially the third member in Genius Network.
Wow. So yeah, I was not in Genius Network at that time, but Joe had done this get together in Maui at Joe Sugarman's place, and he had invited my wife Lisa and I'm like, well, I'm getting an invitation to go to Maui and to go to Joe Sugarman's and to go hang out with Joe. And I'm like, heck, we're in, man. and that's where you and I met. And it's interesting because I joined Genius Network the following year. I'm just going to tell the story because this is such a testament to the power of relationships. And at that time in my life, investing, I had never invested $25,000 at one shot in something before, and that was a little bit of a stretch for me, and I did it. And I remember the very first meeting that I ever went to, and we went out to dinner that night to this sushi restaurant, and I ended up sitting next to you at dinner that night, and we got to talking, and you were just asking me stuff, and I told you what was going on, and I shared a little bit about, I'm really excited to be here, but man, this is the biggest investment I've ever made too. And there was a little bit of apprehension there. And the more we talked and the more you found out about what I was doing, you were like, you know what, Kev, let's do some stuff together, you and I. And let's make an impact together. Let's get some money back in your bank account. Let's get that money just back in your bank account so you can just enjoy being in the group for the year without the weight of that on your shoulders. And so we did. And within about a month and a half, the majority of that $25,000 was right back in my bank account. And I'm like, wow, what an awesome experience that was. And you and I have been friends ever since. And now, man, we get to do business together now too. We've been doing business together for a while, and it's just been such an amazing. Dan, I am incredibly grateful for the relationship and the friendship that you and I have had all these years. And 17 years it took us to get around to doing this podcast interview. I think that's great.
I agree. And, Kevin, what I admire and respect about you so much is, at that time I was into big, and we were doing pretty well at that. Yeah. And you were very genuine about what you wanted. You were very clear on what you wanted in your family and your kids and your wife and, that sacred ground, if you will. And I respected and admired how you set up your business to really drive your life. Whereas I will admit that in my early years of business, I've been doing this 32 plus years now. In my early years, I let the business decide what was going to happen or not. In my life, my wife, my kids initially got leftovers until I made some, significant shifts. Health wise, mentally, all these sorts of things. So kudos to you for setting a good example.
Well, my honor, my pleasure, Dan. Well, okay. So what I want to do is I want to start by turning it over to you so that we can set a little bit of context here and let the listeners know, so let's talk about, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work that you now do through Breakthrough 3X and the impact you're making in the world.
Well, it's to help leaders grow, right? So we work with founders, we call them visionaries or imagineers. which is a Disney term,
Uh-huh.
help them exponentially grow their impact. Our mission is to, help another 1,000 founders and CEOs add at least 7 figures to their business, and through them, a minimum of 7-figure impact as far as number of people. So it's a 1 billion person impact over, the next handful of years. And it's really bringing sanity, in many ways. I look in the mirror where I was, say, 20 years ago, and I was so busy chasing, and we meet a lot of people who are hungry and they're driven and they're growth oriented, exponential thinking, 10x thinking, whatever you call this stuff, exponential thinking and driving. And many times they let their health go. They let their, and I did that. They let their family go to some degree. And I feel like I did a part of that. So our mission really is about bigger than even just like numbers. And we're saving lives, we're saving marriages, we're saving health, we're saving relationships, parent to child and vice versa, through this process that we, have built through our model, which is, we call it our 5-step direct response branding method, right? That brings sanity and systematizing the business to scale at a predictable, sustainable rate.
Yeah. And so I'm just going to brag on you a little bit, because, you and I have had this partnership arrangement for a few years now. And you are just one of these guys that I am so honored to be able to know, because you and your whole team are such world-class experts at doing what you guys do. When I do my thing, you just make me look really good.
Thank you.
And as of right now, I have facilitated a lot of relationships over the years. But as of right now, you're the one that holds the record as the most valuable one that I have facilitated to date. And my gosh, I'll just put it out there: $1.2 million in growth in revenue in, get this, 120 days. That is amazing. and through that, I can get emotional about this, because I get to do my thing. I get to facilitate relationships for people like you and people like Sachin, who, that's the guy's company that you helped achieve those results. And but also by doing that, it just continues to increase my confidence level in what I do, because the more I do this and the more results like that happen, the more proof I get to stack up over here. And there was a time when I used to think, well, Kev, do you really got what it takes? Are you really that valuable to people? And after doing this for a number of years and getting results like that, we've got enough proof that if I ever doubt myself, which it can creep in sometimes, all we got to do is look at all the proof over here and be like, no, you got it. You got the goods. You deliver.
Yes.
And so I am just, I want to, you've had such a role in my growth, and just me. And because now I know for a fact we are on a trajectory to facilitate relationships that are going to be worth 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, what have you. And it's not even the revenue. It's the impact that inspires me. The revenue is just the natural organic byproduct of making the impact and stuff. And so you have been such an instrumental part of that, and I'm just so incredibly grateful for that. And so let's shift gears here a little bit, and I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of our listeners. And so, Dan, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And I'm just really excited to dig in and hear about your experience and hear your story with this topic of relationships.
Yeah, Kevin, like that's a powerful question, and it's loaded because it's so deep. And so for brevity, I think of all the coaches I've ever had in my life. When I was a kid, I grew up in the inner city of Detroit, and we were on welfare as a family more than a few times, and it was, very humbling. And I had a coach. His name was Jerry Sanders. He's
Okay.
passed away now, but he was a coach on our football team called the West Side Cubs in the inner city of Detroit. And there was a time I pulled him aside and it was kind of crying, going, "I'm not going to be able to play." And he's like, "Why not, Dan?" And I'm like, "Because I can't afford spikes." And so he said, "Make sure you're here tomorrow for our practice." And so he showed up the next day and he got me these Pro Keds that were probably whatever, $15 spikes that he gifted me to give me a chance to play a game I loved. And it's, I've been fortunate to meet just, generous people, trustworthy people, coaches in my life. My dad was a coach. Like, he inspired me. My dad introduced me to personal development when I was 10 years old, Kevin. And, from books, he just fueled me. And at the time it was biographies about, sports heroes I had from Mickey Mantle to Billy Martin to Ted Williams to Willie Mays and a bunch. And then he took me to my first seminar when I was 10. I was the only kid sitting in this room with coaches, and they were going through all this stuff. And I have the manual still stored away. And the page in this manual says, in life and in baseball, because it was a baseball camp, he said, the winning is 90% mental, the rest is physical. And it was baseball and life.
Wow.
And I still remember vividly that to this day. And then my dad got me other books. So my dad had a huge role. Also, his failures or learning lessons, we'll call it, also played a significant role, because my dad tried to start a couple businesses. He started a restaurant bar in Detroit, and location wasn't great. Long and the short of it, it shut down. And, I talked to my dad today, and he says, it's because he didn't know how to market. Right. He never learned how to market. Right. He was just trying to, wear 1,000 hats and, good salt of the earth human being, blue collar, etc. But, worked till from sun up to sundown and then some, and just did everything he could to serve people at his restaurant bar. And it didn't work out. Then a few years after he regrouped, we went through bankruptcy and more welfare and stuff. He started another business that was a printing business in a suburb of Michigan, or of Detroit, called Livonia. And so it was called International Minuteman. He's like, "Okay, well, I did it on my own. That didn't really work. Let me get a franchise." And so he got some family to contribute some money to start up this franchise called International Minuteman Press. He launched it. And at this time now, I was 13, Kevin, and I got to watch my dad do business more, right? I only got a little bit of that when I was, 10 or 11, and when he had the restaurant. But when I was 13, I was vividly watching how my dad operated. And he was just too nice. Like, he gave everybody credit terms, and he gave everybody billing terms, and, payables were like unlimited. It seemed like, you could pay in 6 months, a year, whatever. But he was a small business, right? I remember his sales rep, her name was Jeannie, and I remember him paying her full commissions on sales she made that weren't collected, because he was just generous and so nice. And he just, he didn't understand some of these little details in business. And then again, asking my dad, like, "What do you think was," he goes, "I never really learned how to market, like, and nor did the franchise have it. Like, they were so far from really having a marketing system." And so that drove me. And then he introduced me to personal. He got me this book called Mentally Tough, written by Dr. James Lohr, when I read, and it was how to apply sports psychology in business.
Okay.
It was called Mentally Tough. And I read that book cover to cover 10, 15 times. I've got it over here too still. And I mean, it had a profound impact on my life. And then now going to relationships. I mean, I've still stood on the shoulders of giants since he, like, he awakened this, like, whatever you want to call it, this inspired human to the idea of exponential growth. That, like, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Which my dad had always kind of leaned into that. And then I got introduced to a lot of the experts in the world, Tony Robbins and Tom Hopkins and so many others, Brian Tracy, over the years. From that, simple beginning, I got introduced to marketing, like, when I was in college. Like, my sister got me a job. So I think of my sister who got me the job in marketing, which was in a direct mail business, where I learned all the basic fundamentals of this stuff and got a chance to work side by side with the owner and the person who bought the mailing list and wrote the creative and the copywriting. And I absorbed it, and I went to more personal development stuff and attended more seminars, and I just devoured it. And then I was in my senior year of college, Kevin, and I started my first company. And I had learned some pretty amazing marketing and sales strategies and started, and we launched. I mean, we did 7 figures in 6 months or less, right out of
Wow.
the gate.
Wow. Wow.
I was 22. Like, this is going back all the way to 1992. But
Wow.
what we were good at marketing and selling wise, I was terrible at business. I did a business with a friend, and like he ended up liking the bank account a whole lot more, and all these sorts of nightmare stories that happened. I had to regroup. I ended up verge of bankruptcy, blah blah blah. And I, through fast forward the first 10 years was a train wreck. And then I remember I had moved to Arizona. I had written the transcript. I've got it here somewhere. It's actually sad. I'll save it. I wrote the transcript for my book, my first book called A Champion in the Making.
Okay.
But it was never really designed to be like a printable book. I wrote it for me to just keep me on track, because I started to figure some things out. And I wrote it as like a how-to manual for me. Like, literally, that's what it was. And then a girl at the time who I dated before, her name's Michaeline, she inspired me and gave me confidence to go, wow, I read part of this and this should be a book. Like, this is amazing.
Wow. Wow.
I had no idea how to put a book together. So I literally went to the print shop down the road from our place and I got it printed. And it was like $30 a book to print this dang thing, because I had no clue how to do it. And then I was like, how am I going to sell it? So I was in the print shop, serendipitous relationships, Kevin. And I met this guy named, God, what was his name? I forget his name right now. It's in my book, because I did remember it at that time when I was writing it. But he was the general, Jim Hanemeyer. Jim was the general manager at a radio show. And now I'd done infomercials by that time, and both TV, radio, direct mail, etc. This is all pre-internet stuff. So Jim was in there, and I was picking up boxes of books, and he's like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I help people reach their fullest potential. He goes, I'd love to have you on our show. I'm the general manager at NBC Phoenix.
Wow. Wow.
Serendipitous. And he said, can I take a book? I said, yeah. And then I shipped him a couple of days later to the station, and I started following up, right? Started following up, and nothing. It went crickets. Like, it was one of those relationships that sometimes goes, kids today call it, my kids who are 18 and say, they call it, they ghosted me. Like, he ghosted me for 6 months. And I just didn't stop following up. About once a month I would check in, and it took like 6, almost 7 months, Kevin. And what ended up happening, because I knew, like, if I could just get a chance, if, I felt like the world's best kept secret, if I could just get something that would give me, I didn't want to do the traditional book tour thing. I didn't want to go traditional selling routes. I wanted something that was more scalable. And again, because of my experience on TV, but I knew I couldn't, at that time, I couldn't afford to redo another infomercial, which at that time, it would cost you about 150 to 250 grand to do it, just to produce it, not include by the airtime.
Wow.
But radio, I calculated, I was like, that's a much more inexpensive way for an average guy like me to do it. Nobody else is really doing it at the time. Again, this is going back 20 years. So I kept following up with Jim to get that door open. It was after the holidays. I remember Jim, I'd kind of let it a month had gone by, and I was just kind of, I got to find other outlets, whatever. So Jim did follow up, and he said, I've been meaning to call you. And I got your Christmas card. Because as you know, Kevin, we've known each other a long time. Like, once I have what I would consider somebody a most valuable relationship, I send them family stuff. I send them some of the business stuff. It doesn't mean they bought it. Like, they're just considered a valuable relationship. He got one of those things, which was a card at the holidays.
Okay.
Right? And I've been meaning to call you. We connected. I ended up going in and ended up being on NBC, where I bought the airtime for less than $100 per airing when it was all said and done. That's what I negotiated per airing. And every time we aired the show on NBC, we got 5 to 20 some leads every single time. And it drove into, at that time, you remember our meeting, you had become a king of doing teleseminars, which was the predecessor to webinars. I had built a automated teleseminar model where every Thursday, every week of the year, so all the leads would go to that, and then we'd enroll into our coaching model at the time. That was the genesis of all of this. And so 5 to 25 every time we aired it. And then I was like, why don't we multicast it into other networks, into other states? And I started building a global presence. Then that was around the time, then a damaging confession. So Jim was important. Another person, because I now had a larger audience building, I started hosting events. Chris Atwood, I met Chris and Janet Atwood, who wrote the book called The Passion Test. I
Yep.
was hosting an event at the National Speakers Association headquarters. And one of the people who had responded, I forget whether it was an ad on radio or if it was a newspaper ad, because we've done that magazine, which we ran local. We drove to to this event that we would host at the National Speakers Association headquarters. And one of the people sitting in there, his name was Jason Light. Never forget Jason. He's still very active in all kinds of different things right now. And so Jason was sitting in the front row off to the left. And he pulled me aside at the end of he goes, "This was amazing." He goes, "Do you know Robert Allen and Mark Victor Hansen?" I go, "Well, of course I know of them, but I don't know." And he goes, "Well, this next week, I believe it might've been 2 weeks." He said in Orlando, they're hosting an event called this Enlightened Millionaire thing.
Okay.
For a new book they have coming out soon, which is called The 1 Minute Millionaire. What would you think? What would the chance be that you could get out there? And I was like, "I'll find a way." So I flew to Orlando, get an introduction from Jason. And originally he introduced me to Janet and Chris, who were really the ones driving the Enlightened Millionaire program that was attached to this 1 Minute Millionaire model and campaign. So I met Chris and Janet. And I would have to say, if I were to say what the last 20 years that was instigated by a couple of human beings that I have a deepest admiration or respect for, it would be Chris and Janet. Because I ultimately met Joe Polish through Chris and Janet, because what ended up happening, I ended up doing speaking with Mark Victor Hansen and Robert Allen's events and some different doors open. That ultimately led to meeting someone named Deb Thompson, and Deb Thompson and her brother introduced me to John Childers. John Childers had built a radio model in the travel industry, and John Childers is somebody Russell Brunson talks a lot about today, but back then he had the highest paid speaking program in the world.
I remember that.
To attend this 2-day thing. And so I met John, shared my story about what, and he challenged me sitting down one day. He's like, "Well, could you create a how-to program, how you've done this with radio and driving into your model?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And I go, "When do you want?" And he goes, "Next week." So I literally, in 3 days or so, Kevin, literally create a course, soup to nuts, $1,500 program. He has me then speak at his events. Like, all these dominoes, right? You think of the dominoes.
Yep.
But it would have not happened had it been for this coach, Jerry, who had a little confidence in this young broke family kid who had a little athletic talent, who then ultimately my dad continued to coach, inspire me and encourage me mostly to just, seek out this wisdom. And then he fueled it because he knew I wanted it. He didn't force any of it. He's like, "You want it? You want it?" I'm like, "Yeah, I want to read it. I want to read it. I want to learn." And I studied this stuff and, I haven't stopped. And then in the last 20 years, I would say Chris and Janet were one of those significant dominoes that so many byproducts spin off of that introduction from Jason Light to them.
Wow.
Where, I mean, it's been amazing what's happened.
You and I have never had this conversation.
By the way, I want to include Joe Polish. I want to include you, right? All these strategic byproducts. And, it's like, I believe we've all been living in the multiverse. It just wasn't defined that way. And that's called the relationship multiverse.
Yeah.
And I always try to do my very best, as maybe you're listening or watching right now. I've gone through so many tangents here to a degree, but I always try to remember, Kevin, that's what I value about you so much. You, Dr. Jeremy Weiss, there's a couple of you guys that to me are like at the very best of it. And I feel like I can do so much better at recognition and appreciation with people I've come in contact with who love me up in their own way. They were generous of heart, generous of spirit, generous of their time, generous of opening doors. And what I believe to be true is I do my best to try to remember where it started, because I see so many people who don't. I see so many people that you could open a door. I'm sure you've got this. There's two types of people. One, I do my best to try to always acknowledge and appreciate you for all of the things you've done for me, which you've done a bunch, that is priceless. And then I know there's people who they just see it as a transaction. They don't see this relationship capital to even think back, where did it start? And it's one of the reasons I donate money. I invest money to some of the people I've mentioned, to their causes and their things, just because.
Yeah.
To me, and am I perfect at it? No, but it's a just because. I feel like it's whatever's going on for all of us, it's the best we can do, but also to try to stay in connection of remembrance and gratitude and reflection of I know where part of this stems from. And it's a gift. It's God's gift, and it's all these sort of things. So anyway, not to go off too far on that. It has nothing to do with, to some degree,
No, that was
it has everything to
amazing.
do with exponential thinking and exponential growth, because relationship capital, to me today, what I've learned, and I haven't always had this right, I believe relationship capital is the most important capital you can have.
Yeah, yeah. And you and I, we haven't had this conversation before because we just haven't. And I didn't know about all these ties, over the years. And, Chris and Janet Atwood, The Passion Test, when that book came out, I read that book, and that totally changed my life, because that was, after reading that book, that was before you and I met. And because that was when I realized, holy cow, you know what? You have never asked yourself, what do you really want from your business? And because what I got is not what I want. And I remember distinctly being at work. This was when I ran the cleaning and restoration business, at work on a Sunday, again, thinking, this is not what I want. I don't want to be here at work on a Sunday. I want to be with my family right now.
Right.
And I actually took out a piece of paper and started writing down some of the things of what do I want, because that book encouraged me to do that, and I had never done that before. And once I figured out what I wanted, I'm like, okay, we have changes to make. And by the time you and I met, I had kind of figured a lot of that out and was living that in my life. And today, even more so, that, I mean, my gosh, we've got 7 kids now, 6 grandkids currently. I just found out 2 weeks ago that we're going to have another grandchild in about 10 months.
Congratulations.
And I get to be this husband, be this father, be this grandfather, that I feel incredible about my role in those areas of my life, which makes me way more effective at business too, because when we really do have it all, that we can run the business, and that we can have the personal life that we want to. And it's really just all our life. The business, yes, the personal life, it's just our life. And we get to be the author of how we want that to look and stuff. And Chris and Janet and the Passion Test book is what opened my eyes to that. So I think that's awesome. I did at one of Joe Polish's annual Genius Network events years ago in New York. I ended up just by happenstance catching a ride to the airport with Janet Atwood. So I got to hang out with her on the way to the airport one time when we were both flying out and stuff. And I thought that was the coolest thing, So,
yes.
Well, okay. So I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation, because for me, for this podcast, I mean, the goal has always been really simple. Is I want to use these conversations to inspire our listeners, who are also entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs, to just place a more intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own lives. And of course, with your help today, we definitely delivered on that. I happen to know I have insight that anybody listening to this doesn't have, and I want to make sure to give you the opportunity, because I know people listening to this are going to be like, dang, Kevin, I really like Dan. I like the way that he shows up. And I would like to hear more about them and the work that they're doing. And so I want to make sure we get to give you the opportunity to share that, any resources, any websites that you want to share with anybody too. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a way to get more new leads, more new appointments, more new clients in a more systematic, predictable approach, then I've made something available for you as you're watching or listening, a part of Kevin's community here right now. And you can go to breakthrough3x.com/ILC. I love connection, the first letter ILC. So breakthrough3x.com/ILC. We've got our new book and a whole bundle of like, it's just a crazy thing that our team has put together of like about $1,000 in checklists and tools and resources and training and
Wow.
all these things to help you simplify at the end of the day and make sense of this crazy world of marketing that's changing every single day and every single minute. It can seem, like it's overwhelming, or maybe you feel like things that were working 6 months are not working. And how do you get out of that? Or maybe, you feel undervalued, or maybe you feel underperforming, or the world's best kept secret. This book is no lightweight. It's literally built as a checklist of items that literally, if you go to the back index and search lead gen techniques, and you go to a video strategy, it's designed that you go in the index and find your recipe as you need it, or you'll see that it's a collection of some great stories. So if you want to get your hands on this, well, the other great thing that we've done, you get this $1,000 bundle ish through Kevin, and you get to choose your price. And what we're doing as part of this is a special invitation. So you choose your price, whatever you want, and we'll get this in your hands immediately. You can download it immediately, and we'll send it out to you as well. Is again, breakthrough3x.com/ILC. In addition, for every book purchase that we have happen through Kevin, we're also going to donate here in Arizona, which is where I live. We have hunger is a pretty significant issue for a lot of kids and families, similar to how I was at a certain point. So for every book made, we're donating 10 meals to feed hungry kids here in Arizona. So this is a gift that opens a door of another layer of generosity. You're already in Kevin's world, so you probably already lived that principle, but you can know that it's a force for good. So whether you get one or you get some others for people you love and care about, again, go to breakthrough3x.com/ILC. This is over 30 years of focus effort that we put into this, of examples and templates and checklists and tools and resources for you. Or maybe if you're a founder already playing big games, you got a team. So you might want to get this in their hands to help simplify it and ultimately create a marketing system. So there you go. Choose your price. Go to breakthrough3x.com/ILC. I don't know that we can be any simpler than that. And we'll donate for every book order is 10 meals to feed hungry kids here in Arizona.
Well, that's a pretty doggone amazing offer, and kind of a no-brainer, And so thank you so much for that, Dan. And I just thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. Any last thing you feel led to share before we call it a wrap?
Well, I think if I were to say one thing, you brought up about what do you want from Janet? And I think this is one of the biggest crystallization, because again, Kevin, you've known me on 17 years. I was on the tail end. I was fortunate to sell 2 companies, and very blessed that was able to happen. We've been able to help company founders, owners scale their businesses exponentially to prepare to sell, to prepare to exit, to prepare to go public. And there's just a lot of what we've learned. I mean, our portfolio of clients has done over $1.2 billion now in growth, and that's probably on the lower side. I haven't always had it right from a holistic approach, like you brought up, which is life and business together. And I think back to the time when I was sacrificing my health, and I was 85 some pounds heavier than I am right now. And you knew me then. Like I was like Jabba the Hutt, like a giant. And I've been able to make these shifts that, like Joe Paulo shared the quote that's an Indian proverb: he who has his health has 1,000 wishes. He who does not has only one. And I ended up in a hospital for a couple of days. And I hope this never happens to you as you're watching or listening right now, or anybody you care about, especially someone who's a driven, hungry, growth-minded, exponential growth-minded founder. Because sometimes that old adage, you can sleep when you're dead, or you hustle and grind and like you can take a break in a few years once you get it done. You don't have to buy into that nonsense. You can have both, as Kevin mentioned. And I believe today I'm living proof of that. Ideally, you get inspired or encouraged in some way. And I don't believe there's a one size fits all for anybody. But ideally, you can pick up some stuff from Kevin. You can pick up some stuff from me, starting with this book as a door opener to show you ways to simplify everything in business and open doors so you can have better quality relationship with your kids. I was able to take almost 6 months off of my business about 18 months ago, where I was able to focus full-time on football as a coach for my son, as well as our high school here locally. 6 months because the team ran the business. Now, I've since been rebooted and rejuvenated to have some new focuses and new goals of growth and domination, so to speak. But that's a choice that I'm making more consciously than ever before. And you can still have a great quality of life with your family, with your health and your business, and still dominate. You can.
Yeah.
Ideally, through Kevin, through us, through this book, others, there's lots of great talented people out there. Know that you can have your health. You can have the great relationships with the people you love the most and care about the most, and give them the time. That old bullshit that says, like quality over quantity. Why not have both? Why not have both?
That's right. That's right.
And you can do that with your health. You can do that with your growth. You can do that with your family and most valuable relationships. You can build it if you're willing to take the time to set the right boundaries in place to do that. And again, it'd be my honor to serve you. It'd be my honor to learn about what you're up to, what you're excited about, and if there's some small way that we can be a catalyst to help you grow exponentially and simplify what you're doing from a business and growth and marketing point of view, please reach out, hit the link or wherever it is on the page, and would love to do that. So that's what I'll end with.
All right. Well, Dan, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. Really appreciate it and really appreciate you. Thanks again.